A reading from the 10th chapter of Luke. An expert on the law stood up and put Jesus to the test and said, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit everlasting life?" Jesus answered, "What's written in the law? How do you read it?" The expert on the law replied, "You must love the Most High God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Jesus said, "You've answered correctly. Do this and you shall live." But the expert on the law, seeking self-justification, pressed Jesus further. "And just who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "There was a traveler going down from Jerusalem to Jericho who fell prey to robbers. The traveler was beaten, stripped naked, and left half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and the priest saw the traveler lying beside the road, but passed by on the other side. Likewise, there was a Levite who came the same way. This one, too, saw the afflicted traveler and passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, who was taking the same road, also came upon the traveler and, filled with compassion, approached the traveler and dressed the wounds. Pouring on oil and wine, then the Samaritan put the wounded person on a donkey, went straight to an inn, and took care of the injured one. The next day, the Samaritan took out 2 silver pieces and gave them to the innkeeper and requested, "Look after this person, and if there's any further expense, I'll repay you on the way back." Which of these 3, in your opinion, was the neighbor to the traveler who fell in with the robbers? The answer came, "The one who showed compassion." Jesus replied, "Then go and do the same." La palabra de Dios. Jesus' parables are always told to catch a listener's attention, to show another perspective on the world, to call into question the status quo. And in the case of the Good Samaritan, they often convey news that audiences don't want to hear. The parable of the Good Samaritan, as we saw this morning, is probably one of the most familiar of Jesus' parables. We all know the story. A lawyer, eager to embarrass Jesus, asks him, "Who's my neighbor?" Then Jesus tells the story of a Jewish man who lay beaten in a ditch. 2 fine, upstanding Jewish men walked past. One of them a priest, the other a Levite, but neither stopped. Only the Samaritan stopped to offer help. But when we read this today, we really miss the impact unless we know what the listeners were hearing when they heard that word Samaritan. Samaritans to the Jews were enemies, deep, deep enemies, long-held enmity between them for generations. And perhaps because of our familiarity with this parable, and in fact that we've reduced it to a moralism like we should all be good Samaritans and help those in need, these words lose their jarring impact. The Samaritans were bitter foes of the Jews. It began hundreds of years previous when the Hebrew people were taken into captivity by the Assyrians. And what happened over those generations as the Hebrew people tried to maintain a unique identity in captivity by clinging to various holiness codes and practices of religion, over time, many of them began to adopt some of they were enculturated in a new society. They even intermarried. And so over generations, we have this group of people who no longer are part of this tight-knit, exclusive group, but these are people who have intermarried, have children and grandchildren. But then what happens when they are released and go back to Israel? Many of those families also return to Israel. And so when they returned, along with those Hebrews who maintained this exclusive understanding of God's love and the practices that involved, there was deep, deep hatred between these, in part because they were coming from the same family. They had betrayed the family, and they were always seen as villains. Anytime you would tell a story, they would be the worst imaginable example of what it meant to be a people, part of the people of God. And so you can understand that when Jesus named in this parable that it was the Samaritan, this hated one, this one who epitomizes the other, the enemy. Just imagine in your own world, in our world today, think of someone that you just can't even see talking to. And we all have those people that, it's going, I know I'm supposed to love people, but I don't like this person. But Jesus said, this is the one who is truly following the love of God, because rather than be bound up by barriers that we erect between language, between culture, between religion, between social status, between race, any of those things, Jesus said what it means to be a Christian is to show compassion and love, and especially to people that we previously would identify as someone we don't like. There was a Slovenian philosopher, quite well known in the world of philosophy. I'd never heard of him before, but at any rate, he was quoted as saying, "An enemy is a person whose story you have not heard yet." And so what I'd like to do, in this community, we have a practice of telling stories, telling our own stories, reflecting on Scripture stories. And so I would like to invite you into a time of talking to someone in the room, preferably someone you haven't talked to recently or someone you may not know, and just reflect a little bit on this story and ask this question. Who are the others in your world? And can you think of any time in your own experience when that stranger became a neighbor to you or for you? And perhaps delve into, how did that happen? Let's take about, and I recognize that this might not be something that everyone is comfortable with doing, so if you would not like to speak, if you feel better not talking to someone in this way, you're welcome to sit quietly and meditate yourself, go out into the sunroom, there's coffee out there, just spend some time in prayer. But I would encourage you, if you have the courage, to see if you can find a new neighbor. So let's take about 10 minutes and have that conversation with someone in the room. The challenge for this community and for all of us, and I certainly put myself in this category as well, is we really are comfortable with talking with one another and learning our stories. Jesus's challenge, I think, to us is, so you need to push yourself, and I mean everyone here, including myself, to reach out and learn the stories of people that you might almost put in an other category, or someone that doesn't travel in your circles normally, because that's how we will build a much more compassionate world. And certainly, when we look around our world today, and even in this city, the idea of walking by somebody beaten up on the side of the road is not far-fetched when you look at the tents and the people on the streets and the people begging on the corners. So I would leave that with you as just a challenge. What new stories or what new connections are you making or trying to make as you go forward?